Are you looking to build a website or mobile application? Well, I'm Dan Melnick, and I'm the founder of Zeng. And I started this company because I had trouble finding good developers. I partnered with Qasim Masood, and he's in Pakistan. I'm in Austin, Texas, to offer cost-effective software development. We work in U.S. hours, and we're very efficient. We've worked with some of the top companies that you might recognize, like Last Media and AppSumo, and we'd love to help you out as well. So check us out, myzeng.io.
As far as sharing what I do and what I've been up to, just a few days shy of a year ago, I joined Pulumi after working, kind of danced around in support and consulting roles, fixing and delivering cloud platforms, everything from like OpenStack to Kubernetes. Before that, I was a Linux expert working, kind of specializing on individual, Linux systems, like individual nodes themselves, servers, and client devices. And nowadays, instead of like building and operating the platforms manually, I'm working in the DevOps space. Recently here at Pulumi, just working on infrastructure as code type projects. We kind of live at the intersection of everything cloud, since we tell all of the different cloud capabilities what to do when as a part of orchestration. So doing DevOps at Pulumi is extra fun for me because here we do infrastructure as code as actual code. So using general purpose programming languages and things like that. Over the past year, obviously, we've been working a lot in the AI space, helping to teach the formerly academic and science niche that AI was, how to operate in production with real cloud and DevOps practices. And actually today I've been busy working on my CFPs that I'm submitting for KubeCon North America, around the topics of building a test-driven AI application product deployment pipeline. So kind of taking test-driven development from the app dev space where it's common into the AI space where it is still kind of a new practice that needs to be invented. But we've done a lot of AI work here at Pulumi on our Pulumi AI product. And from that, begun developing test-driven development frameworks for it. So, also kind of dabbling in the Kubernetes space and kind of the VMware replacement future that needs to be kind of built since VMware was most recently acquired, and carrying a talk about that to KubeCon hopefully as well. But we'll see. It's hard to get your talks accepted at KubeCon.
So can you tell me about the products that you're building and that you're working on? Like you said, you're working on AI products.
Yeah, so specifically, I am an educator at Pulumi. So since I work in the DevRel space, I carry Pulumi stories out to the public from the experts here that build them. And then I write some of the automation glue code to like orchestrate demos and things like that. So I dance around all over different projects, whether it's like polishing things that other people have built so that we can show those publicly, or just building kind of hello world examples with different partners that we work with. But on the whole, Pulumi offers an infrastructure as code tool that is our open source, and that is it competes in the same space as CloudFormations, Terraform, overlaps with some things you can do with Ansible, for example, cross-plane, things like that. And then around that, our business model is built on the cloud offering that we wrap that experience with to enhance infrastructure as code operations at scale, with cloud features like secrets and configuration management, but that kind of competes in the kind of HashiCorp Vault space, if you have ever used Vault before. And also gets into like the CI/CD pipeline to some degree, where we build deployments features which you can use to GitOps your IAC as well. We play nice with like GitHub Actions, Jenkins, GitLab runners, Circle CI, your usual runners tools. But if you are just looking to operationalize your IAC itself directly, you can use just Pulumi Cloud features for that, which ends up adding on a lot of fun integrations so that you can see drift detection in action, and schedule various types of IAC actions on cron type syntax to automate certain rollouts and things like that. And then one of the funner ones for me and my use cases is a time to live feature with our deployments that basically you can deploy infrastructure and then set an automatic time for self-destruct of that infrastructure. So if it's going to be fairly short-lived infrastructure for a day for a batch jobs, or a week if you're doing like demo work or stuff like that, or otherwise if you have production infrastructure that you're expecting to tear down on a given schedule, that feature can help a lot with cost savings and making sure you don't accidentally have cloud spend bills racking up on infrastructure that it's going to be end of life at a certain date. So I use that a lot myself.
And the AI tool that you're using?
Yeah, so the AI tool that Pulumi created, it's Pulumi AI, and it's geared to helping write infrastructure as code. It is a ChatGPT powered chatbot, as you might expect. And it is augmented with retrieval augmented generation. So that's where you can take a user prompt and programmatically inject relevant reference data to the prompt that gets shipped to OpenAI's ChatGPT API endpoint. So that when you prompt for deploying something with, say, a CloudFront integration on AWS, if you prompt it for that and it ships to ChatGPT, it will include all of the current libraries that Pulumi offers for coding that in your IAC, so that ChatGPT will respond with up-to-date library versions and syntax and API definitions and things like that. So using that helps a lot if you have developers who are comfortable with a programming language but not necessarily well practiced in writing cloud infrastructure automation. And then you can also see it assisting a lot when you have, for example, a classic ops, kind of someone with my background who is stronger in traditional operations, cloud automation, and things like that with Ansible or other tools like Terraform and such, who maybe aren't as familiar or skilled at writing, say, Python, Golang, TypeScript, etc. So it can really help traditional DevOps personnel get more comfortable with coding the Pulumi infrastructure as code in the language that they're using as well.
And
Yep.
I was thinking your products, the product that you're building and you're working on, that will be integrated with, especially with AWS services.
Can you say again?
The product that you're building, especially will be integrated with AWS services.
No, wait, no, I'm not understanding. You'll have to explain yourself.
The product that you're building or you're working on will be integrated.
Which product are you asking about? Because I don't build products.
Have you understood?
What was that? Oh,
I was telling.
you're cutting out a little bit. So you're asking about a product and integration with AWS. Which product are you asking about?
Yeah, the products that you offer or your company is offering, including the product that you said, which is which can be worked with AI?
Okay, so Pulumi AI itself offers assistance with um, uh, okay. I know that we had technical difficulties, so I'm not exactly sure where we left off before that cut off. I believe I was sharing about Pulumi AI, which is ChatGPT powered. Is that what we were talking about?
Along with this, and also you said, another products that you are offering. I'm telling that those products will be integrated and can be worked with AWS services.
Okay, so Pulumi, being an infrastructure as code tool, is built to orchestrate all cloud services. Currently, we offer coverage of something like 163 different cloud offerings, I believe, including AWS, GCP, Azure, and a ton of others. AWS is covered. So if you're asking about like what clouds we support, AWS is definitely one of the clouds that we support a lot. But we have for providers for a lot of different cloud services, including AWS.
And it is an infrastructure as code. So uh, businesses with what scale can be used to
Yeah,
start this
so
product?
as far as the customer bases that we see enjoying our products, this works for everything from really small startups to like Fortune 50 type companies where we see, huge adoption scales, running workloads as big as, you would expect from Fortune 50 companies at the top of, the S&P 500. So Pulumi itself isn't really designed for a given company size. It's more geared to any professional that has a workload that they need to deploy into cloud services that can include, say, whether it's EC2 or building Kubernetes clusters and deploying applications and such on top of Kubernetes, or if you're, say, setting up like Snowflake data lakes and building data science pipelines through AWS into endpoints for, say, SageMaker, where you see AWS serving LLMs, powering, the new wave of AI applications that are being built. And we're a 7-year-old company. We've been powering all kinds of infrastructure automation well before the explosion of the AI craze as well.
You have worked in Dell and you have worked in a couple of other companies before working on
Yeah.
this product. So can you tell more about your skill set and
Yeah. So
experience?
my tech career started 8 years ago. When I'm originally from kind of the Midwest in the U.S., so like Oklahoma, where I grew up around a lot of animals and ranching and stuff like that. And oddly enough, Dell Computers has an office there in Oklahoma City. I got my foot in the door just answering phone calls in the support queue, helping with silly things like Outlook problems and stuff like that, which was funny because in that interview, I couldn't answer any of the questions about how to fix Windows problems because at the time, Linux was already a hobby for me. And that is what I was an expert in. So I failed to answer all of the questions they planned to ask in the interview and just told them a whole lot about the equivalent things in Linux instead. And they decided that was worth hiring. So it was one of those interviews where I think aptitude and was considered more than existing skill. So then I upskilled on Windows and put that into practice for about a year and a half. Migrated my way over into the Linux side of the house at Dell, and then started working a lot more with enterprises in Silicon Valley and all around the world. And then from there, I built a relationship with Canonical. They're the makers of Ubuntu, of course, and ended up getting a job on their support team starting off as a specialist on endpoint devices. So if you see like Ubuntu powered workstations and servers, that's what I worked on a lot in my last year at Dell and first year at Canonical. And then from that position at Canonical, I started learning more about like cloud operations and things like that, supporting OpenStack for predominantly telecom customers, but we have I had a number of other kinds of customers as well, running OpenStack type stuff. From Canonical, I made a jump to Red Hat, and that was when I left support and got into field engineering and consulting. So at Red Hat, that's where I learned how to build containers, Docker containers, do a lot of Docker file authoring and containerization, application modernization, if you will. That's where I originally learned my first capabilities with Kubernetes, doing a lot of OpenShift deployment, and I specialized in Department of Defense, DoD work, and in fintech, so doing work for banks. I did some telecom there as well, but the interesting thing about fintech and DoD work is they share a similar level of restriction, extra restrictions, where you have to be operational in very restrictive networks and air-gapped networks that are completely disconnected from the internet. And if you're working in the CNCF landscape, it's totally doable to work in the air gap, but you have to become really proficient at understanding what your dependencies are and preparing for that ahead of time. So that was a really good way to get familiar with some of the intricate details of how you actually build Kubernetes systems and do other CNCF type work, or CNCF landscape portfolio work. And then from Red Hat, I ended up moving on to Kong. So Kong is an API gateway company and a service mesh company. They build the infrastructure required to operationalize, hundreds and thousands of APIs for given companies. And I got to, learn a lot more about the actual useful work that Kubernetes and OpenStack, things that I had, worked on the infrastructure for before. None of those applications that you run on those clouds are really useful until you get network traffic flowing from your customers into your application and, making sure that it's safe and secure and that you're able to enforce, quality of service, SLOs or things like that, depending on your customers' accounts, entitlements that are flowing in, making sure that east-west traffic for microservice applications flows correctly and is properly secured. And, you have visibility into network traffic errors, things like that. So I got a lot of exposure to the things that run on the infrastructure that I first got proficient at building. So that was a neat step up the stack into the middleware game. And then from Kong, I jumped over to Microsoft. I had been pretty deeply embedded in a lot of the KubeVirt community. So that's virtual machines on Kubernetes, which I'm a big fan of, and have a side project that kind of centers around building KubeVirt-based platforms. And at Microsoft, I was working on a team that was building almost something similar to a self-hosted Azure custom regions. So targeting the telecom industry at first, where they would want to build a near-edge data center for their telecom network. And then in that data center, they wanted to be able to build a Azure, more or less, from the hardware that they bought. So what would happen is they'd build the data center, they'd bring the Microsoft Azure for operators stack in, which was Kubernetes and kubevert on the bare metal, along with a ton of other proprietary code to orchestrate that. And then it uses a bridge to connect into AWS or Azure's Azure Cloud API proper, so that a customer running that stack would be able to just execute like infrastructure as code, or whatever operations procedure they have to orchestrate Microsoft Azure, and to actually schedule workloads on their custom built data center. They would just select the region that is a custom region for that customer, targeting the data center that they built. So that was really cool. It was an interesting experience because their operations pipeline, their deployment pipeline for that stack, which is what I was mostly attached to, is largely powered by a lot of like Bash and some Ansible in there, but generally automation code that is somewhat antiquated as an approach for deployment. And I was already had already built a pretty good relationship with Pulumi, had done a number of engagements publicly with Pulumi in previous roles. And I was invited by a friend and previous coworker to jump over to Pulumi's DevRel team and do some infrastructure as code advocacy work for a while. So that's what I'm doing right now. And it's a lot of fun to be kind of at the bleeding edge of operations just in general. I very wholeheartedly believed in and advocated for and did a lot of Pulumi work before joining Pulumi. So I was big into recommending it as the right way to go before joining. And now getting more familiar with the Pulumi product in general has been a lot of fun to actually sit down and become more of an expert in the more advanced and better ways to practice the Pulumi products in daily work. So I've gotten familiar with a lot of new things. I used VS Code before, but I'd never spent enough time in it to get really proficient. So I'm a lot more comfortable in VS Code now. I've gotten, I wrote the dev container for Pulumi now. So if you use VS Code and you want all of the Pulumi dependencies at the click of a button, then you can just launch the Pulumi dev container to get all of your dependencies and not have to worry about setting up, say, TypeScript locally or something like that. So that was a lot of fun, and getting into, I've been using GitHub Codespaces a lot for my development environment. That way, anything that I build as demo work, anyone else watching or consuming my content can launch the exact same environment without any, arduous prerequisites steps that you would otherwise have to follow and would slow you down to being able to just try the neat gizmo. That's been a lot of fun.
And your career and your experience is quite diversified, working in Dell, Red Hat, and in couple of more companies, and working in Microsoft. Now you're working, API Gateway. Now you're working in this product. So how do you define yourself, having different kinds of skill set and working on completely, you worked on telecom industry and fintech. How do you define yourself, understanding, all these things?
Yeah, so before getting into tech, I was jumping around between a lot of different jobs over time. Generally speaking, I would get familiar with a new industry or a new type of work that was interesting to me. And then within, 2 to 3 years, I would have enough of experience to see the rest of my, growth in that industry plateauing in the relatively near future. And when I see enough to see the plateau, that's usually where I get bored. So I have a problem with getting bored a little too quickly, I think. And then that's when I usually jump to something else. And before tech, what I did is I usually had 2 to 3 jobs at any given time, and it would keep me fairly busy, and interested. But inevitably, I was not really building with the gig work kind of approach that I had at the time. I was a little nervous that I wouldn't be able to build a long-term, stable professional track for myself. And I didn't know if tech was going to be kind of a long-term thing or not, but I got into tech thanks to Dell. And from there, it's really cool because for someone like me that gets bored with things after I, get reasonably good at them, tech in general has not run out of new things for me to learn yet, right? Like, it's a really big industry, a really big field to specialize in. So I have been kind of progressing up the stack a little bit at a time as a general theme. Originally I started out just as an expert, if you will, on individual Linux machines. And then I grew up into some of orchestrating those individual machines into, platforms like OpenStack and Kubernetes. And then I continued working my way up the track. So to the containers that run on those platforms, to the APIs and network layer that makes that all of those platforms do useful work. And then now I am automating that entire stack. I'd like to get into some app dev someday in the future. I have a side project that we're trying to turn into a startup that is a lot more of the application work itself. So if that takes off and gets funding, I should be able to write more app dev code in the future. So at the moment, I've just been designing a career track based on what I want to learn next, and building bridges and a career path to those things that I want to learn based on relevant expertise with technology that I have access to, before I get there. And then a lot of my, career wins when it comes to getting new jobs and stuff like that is largely based on doing my learning in public. So like on my GitHub profile, there's quite a bit of, you might call it a boneyard, because there's a lot of my GitHub repos that are, I might work on for a couple months and then they just end up being neglected for years after that. And so as far as my personal GitHub profile, there's definitely a long trail of learning exercises, kind of backing up the skills that I've developed. And that's helpful as far as portfolio goes. But I also have another organization on GitHub called ContainerCraft. And that's kind of where I maintain long-lived projects that I continue to work on over time. And that reinforces that I'm, I can maintain attention to one given project or a set of projects that share a common goal, and see those evolve over time as my skills continue to develop and mature. And the biggest project in that GitHub organization is called Cargo. It's a KubeVirt powered platform engineering project, and it's of course written in Pulumi and runs on Kubernetes. And that is in its 4th incarnation. So originally, when I first built it, it was OpenStack powered, because that's what I learned first at Canonical. Then I rewrote it on Kubernetes when I was at Red Hat, a second and third time. Initially, all automated in Bash, and then that was kind of the second iteration. The third iteration was the same thing on Kubernetes, but automated with Terraform, Ansible, and some Bash scripts tying all that together. And that was my most successful build to date, but it was still subject to a lot of human error and pitfalls that are easy to make when you have that many different tools responsible for a deployment pipeline. And now on this fourth iteration, I'm really excited because this iteration it's built on Talos Linux, which is an API-driven Kubernetes-specific OS. So the operating system itself is exclusively written for building Kubernetes clusters. It's extremely small, and it is entirely API driven. So instead of having a shell that you can SSH into and either manually execute commands to get nodes ready for Kubernetes, or instead of writing Ansible to prepare those nodes for Kubernetes, or in the case of CoreOS, instead of writing ignition files and then pushing to those CoreOS machines, what Talos does is it exposes a REST API, just like we are normally used to configuring other cloud services with. So it brings parity to how we manage other infrastructure to the table. And it's the only OS that does that in the world that I know of. And so together with Talos and Pulumi for the infrastructure as code, I can actually use one tool for the first time to completely configure everything from the bare metal to the Kubernetes cluster to the applications and platform resources on top of Kubernetes that are required to build this full Kubernetes platform or KubeVirt platform where it kind of provides that cloud-like experience on your own, bare metal hardware, which is a space that I really like working in. And all of that is written in Python, which has been a lot of fun to write. It's been a big focus recently because AI, of course, is a big deal in the tech industry, and predominantly AI right now is largely dominated by Python as a language. So that's kind of been driving that choice for me lately, even though I was interested in possibly writing it in TypeScript or Go or something like that. And maybe a future iteration of the project will be written in another language like that. Who knows?
So today, you as a developer advocate, the past experiences that you had with different kinds of tools and services that you worked with, and also you also understand, development little bit, not worked completely, but you know how things work, and you said you are working on a project right now. So, as a developer advocate, understanding the business side of the technology and also trying to integrate, the development and also, understanding the business side of the technology. So, interacting and trying to manage and make things work. How is this role and how you're enjoying it?
So I think that I've learned a lot about developer advocacy. I've been a developer advocate at Kong and here at Pulumi. And so I guess I'm at 1.5 years total of doing developer advocacy work at these two companies. I took a break and, did the Microsoft work in between these two developer advocacy roles. I think it's really fun working in any type of education type role. Sometimes it's neat to take a break and invest in teaching and sharing about the things that you learn as an individual contributor. I also don't think that developer advocacy is necessarily a career by itself. There are a few people who just make amazing careers for themselves. I mean, Kelsey Hightower is a pretty recognizable one, just doing developer advocacy work long term. That said, probably for most people who spend time in DevRel, it's something that you can do in between other seasons where you might want to specialize as an individual contributor or doing other types of work. Because I think, at least speaking for myself, it's good to learn things and then to educate and share what you've learned. But at some point, I will need to go learn other things and put them into practice and see what it's like to, say next year or the year after, I need to maintain relevance in my specialties to be able to gain that experience. And if I want to do more DevRel after that again someday, that would make a lot of sense. But for me, I don't think DevRel is by itself is necessarily something that I would recommend myself or anyone else do long term in most cases. But to do sort of seasonally. So as you learn things and then you have those stories that you can bring to the public, invest in that. And it's a great activity to actually share what you know and what might be helpful to other people. And so as long as that continues to be like an important way to engage the audience that I have, I'm going to continue kind of pushing ahead on that. But at some point, I'm sure you'll see me like step back away from the public spotlight and do more IC work because I want to maintain relevance and make sure that when I do have something to share publicly, it is absolutely relevant to what it's like to be, in the trenches delivering things on the daily.
So how you are able to adopt yourself to something that is new completely for you? Because that is what you have done in your career.
Yeah. So my side project actually has been a big part of that. So but I was doing Linux work as a hobby before I ever got into tech professionally. And for me, that means doing home lab stuff, right? So initially, my very first home lab was on, discarded computers that were used, Dell Optiplexes or what have you. They're near and dear to my heart because I've truly built a career on Optiplexes, which is kind of crazy and weird. But I don't want to pretend that I had access to the best, the biggest and the best stuff my entire career. Now I have access to very nice hardware that I get to use. Some of it I own, some of it is, shared between friends, and some of it is, I have access to AWS and Azure credits, and I can go build stuff there if I want to try something new, right? And that's definitely a privilege to have access to that. But to build your skill set, if you have access to, internet and an old computer, that's enough to learn really, really important skills. And I think open source originally drew me in because I knew it was a way that I could take enterprise quality software and self-educate on how to operate it and build it. And I've built my entire resume predominantly on self-education around open source. So for anyone that finds themselves capable of Googling relentlessly and trying things over and over and over, expecting failure, but being relentless enough to eventually, achieve success, open source is definitely a really amazing place to, apply that type of aptitude and skill. Just because, for example, early on in my home lab, one of the biggest challenges that I remember being stumped on was how to correctly set up HA proxy, right? Which is just a reverse proxy. It's not something that's super advanced or confusing once you actually understand the space. But at the time, this was 8 or 9 years ago, I was not incredibly familiar with networking and things like that. And so it took a solid 3 months of just failure after failure after failure, trying to actually make it do what I wanted and correctly route traffic and correctly route by URI or correctly route by subdomain or apply the right rate limiting rules to protect my services or correctly set up certificates and things like that. There's lots of little baby steps that add up to a bunch of different ways to set it up wrong, which is what I did a lot until I finally found at least one successful outcome. And then once you have that initial success, iterating from there is easy because you just change a tiny little thing. And then if that breaks it, you know exactly what to troubleshoot, right? It could be really, really hard and easy to want to give up when you're still chasing that first success on the new technology, whether that is HA proxy or a container or Kubernetes or these other more complex systems. But ultimately, like for me, what worked is being relentless. And this was before ChatGPT existed, right? So like you had to do a lot of Googling and you had to get in forums and ask questions, or you had to, when you ask questions, you have to very explicitly document how you build up to the point of having the problem. So the better you can communicate every step of the way, the more likely you are to actually get constructive engagement from the community and things like that. So I highly recommend maintaining things like build logs, even if it's just like dumping your bash history into a text file and then deleting the stuff that doesn't matter so that you have a list of the commands left over that got you to the successful outcome. Like sometimes that's good enough. It at least gives you the breadcrumbs you need to recreate that success in the future, or to share with someone and say, hey, these are the steps I took. This is the error I'm running into. Do you have advice for how I can fix the problem that I'm facing? So being able to communicate clearly about successes and failures is really important if you want to build your own career in tech, or build from your current place in tech into a new area altogether. And that's kind of what I built my career on, is just practicing things like side projects and such relentlessly. And when I do sit down and I think, what am I going to build today? I don't always have to have something that's going to be useful for myself long term. It's nice when I want to build something that I'm going to use for a long time. But sometimes it might just be, hey, I want to assemble a project just to see that I can do it. And then that's going to sit in GitHub and I may never need it again. But 3 years later, you might encounter a problem and you're like, oh, I've solved this kind of problem before. I'm going to go back to the material that I used 3 years ago, and that'll be a good starting point. And then I'll see what's changed, if that's still the best way to solve the problem, or if there's something that I need to replace, that solution with that's more current and modern. But if you have those breadcrumbs to pick up from, it can make it a lot less difficult to, pick that kind of topic and solution up again in the future and evolve along with the industry in general. So that's why I do submit a lot of stuff to my public GitHub repos, even if it's not necessarily super polished, or even if it's not, hey, production ready, it might be completely out of scope. Like I do a lot of stuff that's not production ready. But it's a good way to quickly get familiar with a new technology. And then when you sit down to actually carry something all the way to production, the amount that you have to learn to get from what you know to what you need to know to cross that finish line ends up being smaller. And over time, you start seeing a lot of patterns that are the same. So going from Ansible to Terraform to Pulumi, that's learning 3 different tools. But ultimately, you're just learning 3 different ways to do the exact same thing. So the amount of time that it takes to learn a tool might be pretty big. So learning Ansible at first was pretty daunting, and it took a solid year for me to get really proficient at it. But then progressing from that and learning Terraform, that Terraform didn't take as long to learn because I already understood a lot of the fundamentals of automating the cloud resources that I was previously automating with Ansible. And then going from Terraform to Pulumi, again, right? It's like a different way of accomplishing the exact same thing. Only Pulumi is a superior tool. So I learned it in about the same amount of time that it took to learn Pulumi, because I also had to learn coding languages as well on that learning curve. But understanding what I was trying to do was already familiar to me because Terraform, was something that did the exact same thing. So I was just learning a different way of riding the same kind of bike, if you will. So like each step of the way, just having a habit of keeping track of how you achieved success in a given exercise, leaving that, for yourself in a GitHub repo that you can come back to at a later date can be a really good way to accelerate learning over time. And then, I mean, if you look at like my side projects, I've been really, really consistent at building an entire home lab that slowly is becoming a production ready platform as a whole, and running real production, like enterprise production software. And like if I had to start from scratch and build a totally different professional career track in tech, I still have that to fall back on as, hey, if I'm going into a DevOps role, or if I'm going into a platform engineering or an SRE role, right? Like skills that I have demonstrated in that platform engineering project will definitely apply directly to like any other role that I could go into. So I find a lot of value in open source that way. It's why I'm so religiously supportive of open source and want to give back when I can, because it has definitely given me a light access to a life journey that I never would have had access to or could have even dreamed of from my upbringing and my background. So I hope to see and have fun conversations with all of the other self-taught open source people out there. It's really a joy to celebrate all of our successes together.
So solving problems using different tools and services continuously, understanding and observing all kinds of tools that you work with. How is this? And what do you say about the evolution of technology that you have been in technology, and being as a technologist and took this as a career?
Yeah, okay. So if I were to kind of just share my perspective on how tech has evolved for the last 10 to 15 years and what's coming in the future. I see, Kubernetes in my career has been incredibly pivotal. Not so much for what it is and what it does specifically, but because Kubernetes introduced a way of, it introduced programmable APIs. So, you can apply a CRD, a custom resource definition, to your Kubernetes API, and that programs the API to accept specs that you actually control the Kubernetes cluster with after you apply the CRD. And that was a really big deal for the industry because we applied version control that we are very comfortable with in, say, Git as a practice to programmable APIs. And now we have programmable version controlled APIs. And that allows us to agree on an API spec as an industry, and then improve and enhance that API spec over time so that, initial requirements can be met without necessarily being obligated to perfectly create the best API ever and then being tied into that long term. And then from it allowed us to understand that perfection doesn't have to be the enemy of the good. That good can be iterated on until you achieve perfection, and that GitOps as a practice, that version control and operations in code type lifecycle is the most predictable and confidence-inspiring workflow for organizations to date. So it kind of democratizes access to contributing enhancements to whatever is achieving a successful business outcome with the technology side of the house. that pattern, I think, is going to outlive Kubernetes. Before that, you would submit a ticket to the IT team or to the infrastructure team, or you would submit a ticket and it would go to the app dev team so that you could get changes applied. Or maybe to make one change, you'd have to submit multiple tickets to multiple different teams on the app and infrastructure side of the house. And that could achieve the desired outcome, but the difficulties every step of the way with that pattern just did not allow for high velocity changes. And it made every single change a lot riskier because there was a lot more human time and money invested in each change. By accelerating the velocity with like GitOps workflows, DevOps workflows, and doing orchestration and app dev all in code, that massively reduced the amount, the cost of every little change that you might want to try. So it gave companies more breathing room to experiment and try new things. And that's when we started seeing a lot quicker development of different like web applications and website features. And so I think that was really cool to see the industry agree on. Kubernetes isn't necessarily the best or the easiest way to do anything, but it is most definitely the most common way in the tech industry at this point, in terms of the highest number of individuals and organizations that have all agreed on doing things in a consistent and commonly practiced way. Instead of every company reinventing the wheel however they see fit, like it's a wheel that we're all using at this point. And I think that's the most powerful part of Kubernetes. And I think that Kubernetes is the only thing that's really done that as well as it has. Like the closest that I think any other tech has come to that is whether it's OpenStack or VMware for private clouds, or AWS, GCP, and Azure for public clouds, building those API-driven infrastructure and capability delivery pipelines has been important, but making them programmable and making them version controlled and making them something that you can easily share across an industry, that's what Kubernetes did better. And I think it's really going to be exciting looking into the future to see how taking these patterns, the programmable APIs and shareable infrastructure, containers and operating systems that are all controlled by code, and carrying that into LLM controlled workflows that are definitely coming down the pipe. Like Pulumi is an orchestration and infrastructure as code tool, but we are now also an AI company in that we don't want humans to have to work harder than they have to schedule workloads on, compute infrastructure. Companies don't make money by doing DevOps. DevOps is a step that they have to practice in order to do the thing that does make them money, which is get that application out the door so that they can help their customers, right? DevOps itself doesn't make money. So it'll be interesting to see how AI frees up human time and resources to invest in doing the work that only people can do. So I'm curious to see what happens. I think the patterns that Kubernetes brought to the table are crucial for us to be successful with higher level automation powered by AI. But we're so new on the beginning of this exploration. So it's anybody's guess to actually imagine where that's going to go next. There's a lot of fun ways to imagine it panning out for sure.
Can you share your contributions to my business so that they can able to learn from you?
Do what?
your contributions, like the content that you create, or your the work that you share online.
Yeah. So, as far as, what I do on the daily, largely it is to, um, contribute something that anyone can pick up, whether you're wanting to deploy a new LLM model from Hugging Face on SageMaker and AWS Cloud, or if you just want to build an API gateway and understand how to like incorporate that into your own skill set or into your company's infrastructure. I want to make sure that when I create something, anyone else can achieve the same success, hopefully with less effort than it took me to originally achieve that successful outcome. And I think that is should be a mission that anybody who has the privilege to spend time on give back should be, trying to produce at a rate that is comfortable and enjoyable for them as well. Because it's really, it's kind of that rising tide lifts all boats kind of scenario. Like everything that I've achieved has been because other people have written blogs and produced videos and taken the time to teach what they learn. And so when I have the ability to also give back and share what I learn and produce content that hopefully is interesting and useful to other people, really that's just wanting to make sure that I'm kind of paying it forward, because my entire career is built on other people doing the same. And I don't want to just be selfish about it. So hopefully, by working together, we can all continue to lift up future generations of people who are interested and motivated to build their own careers in tech as well.
I'll share your web links in the description, also in the website, in my website as well. People who finds
Yeah,
this video
great.
or this conversation can able to see the work that you are doing, and can able to learn from you.
Yeah, we'll definitely share those links, and I definitely appreciate you sharing them out with your audience. I've seen your content, and I can see that you um, are doing a great job of bringing people on who are worth listening to and learning from. And so I'm definitely appreciative that you've had me on. I know it was a little bit, it took a while for me to get here, and I'm sorry for making you reschedule as well. So I apologies for being a difficult guest, but thank you for persisting and having me on. It's a privilege to be here.
It's really valuable for me having conversation with you, and I have uh, you know your experience on my show. So one observation which means a lot to me, since you have been in technology for a long time and you have worked in diversified technology tools and services, and you understand the development and also the operations and also the business side of the technology. What is your observation as a curious person who doesn't be on one thing for a long time? As a curious person, what is your observation about my work? You have seen my videos, and what do you think what I'm doing?
Oh, you're putting yourself out there and you're experimenting and you're definitely connecting with a lot of very capable talent that I'm sure is a good way to engage the tech community in general. So I love that you're putting yourself out there and learning from others. I love that you're sharing that with your own audience and community. Like I said, learning in public is a big part of building a long-term career in tech. And it looks like that's what you're doing too. So, everybody has a different skill set and a different passion for how they go about storytelling and sharing. So just keep doing what you're passionate about and challenging yourself to improve. And I'm sure it'll be fun to follow your own progression as you continue to grow in the space.
You are good with the machine, and also you are good with the human being. So how you are able to be good in both? And
I didn't hear
I'm a
that
DevOps.
clearly. What are the two
Uh,
things?
as an engineer, you're talking with computers very well from long time, and you're talking with human beings.
Yeah.
So how different it is? different communication, like lifeless machines and like um, people, humans with life.
You know, the further I get into large scale systems engineering, especially as we're now progressing into NLP, natural language processing, LLMs, AI, stuff like that, the more systems engineering and community engineering appear to be quite similar. Um, Not to commoditize humans at all, but in the end, like with computers, it's all inputs and outputs, right? Um, but when you're working with computers, you need to have an end goal to actually do anything useful. So, um, in the past, until this past year with AI exploding like crazy, um, working with computers has largely been very programmatic and deterministic. You write some code, you put in something that conforms to how that code needs to hear things. So if you're writing YAML or something, you give it that YAML spec that follows the rules of that API. Um, Humans are actually quite similar in that we are expecting certain information at certain times, and we are expecting to create a response to that information, whether that's verbal or written, or whether that's humans performing actions. Like, we're just taking in input and then responding to that. And so it's kind of a science of understanding when you're speaking to an audience what they need. So if you're speaking to a tech audience, obviously you're going to be talking about some tech stuff probably, if that's why you're assembled, and making sure to meet the need, the expectation of that audience, by giving it the right input, and then engaging with the output. So I really like it when I'm giving a talk and there's a lot of interruption and engagement from the audience. Like, that's my favorite type of talk to give, is when you have a lot of that back and forth, because it means that you're sharing something that your audience wants to actually take concepts from and evolve their understanding of by asking questions or sharing a hypothetical or possibly even a very real problem they're encountering, so that you can apply your expertise to what it is that's important to your audience at the time. Um, I, I I see it all as fairly human. I think the biggest reason I enjoy educating around technology is because tech is all for human purposes. Like, tech doesn't matter unless it gives a human access to doing something easier or doing something that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So whether that's watching a movie or whether that's performing a bank transfer or, whatever it is, technology is supposed to enable humans to do human things more easily and bigger or better or faster or whatever it is. So when I'm doing education work in the tech space, for me, it's all about just making sure that I am contributing to that human story that I would be doing with technology if I wasn't stopping and, sharing my story and my insights into how to actually make tech do that thing that makes being a human easier. So it's all about the people in the end for me. So the whole entire time, I'm just trying to contribute to people doing what people do.
I have done masters in software engineering, also bachelors in computer science and engineering. Right now,
Yeah,
I'm working as DevOps engineer for a UK company,
yeah,
remotely from India. So that is my full-time job.
yeah,
Working with machines. Apart from that, I have created this project and trying to interact with different kinds of human beings who belong to different industries, who belong to different countries, and who are coming from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world. So more than 750 interviews I have done in last 3 years. Try to understand, different businesses, like interacting with CEOs, CFOs, CROs, founders,
yeah.
and also engineers, architects, and also police officers, authors, psychologists, like all kind of industries. I'm trying to interview and trying to understand how they are looking at different problems and solving the different kinds of problems, and how they are creating different tools and services, and which will be eventually for human beings. So, as a people's person and also as a technologist, uh, uh, how do you define, my work, or and how this people's work, communication skills of mine, that the diversified communication skills is going to be useful for me in coming days or coming years, based on your experience
Can you repeat the question part again?
as a communicator, as also as a technologist, who understands the development of the applications. What is your observation about me communicating with different kinds of people around the world, and
Keep
being
doing what
a
you're
full
doing
time?
and keep evolving.
Yeah.
It's really, just be relentless.
So my role is DevOps engineering, but I'm talking with people. So how this is going to be helpful for me in future?
I mean, you're giving yourself more exposure. So a lot of people will start out their tech career. I did this too. And I just lived in one tiny little bubble. And so the only things that I had an opportunity to learn are what the people like immediately are surrounding my little corner of the world knew. And I think that's fairly limiting if you're surrounded by very high quality, talent and people who are passionate about like investing in your own learning journey. That can be plenty to keep someone busy for a while. But eventually, it's good to outgrow your comfort zone and continue to push your exposure to other ideas and perspectives and challenge your current way of thinking, because there's a lot of things that I learned early in my career that I learned weren't necessarily the best way to do things later on. And so I would encourage you to continue. The interview track that you're doing is a really good way to expose yourself to how other people solve problems, or how other people think about taking a problem apart and building a solution around the smaller details that fits the larger needs of whatever organization they're in or whatever customers that they're serving. So continue pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, engaging with that wider community of talent. And each step of the way, keep challenging your own assumptions and things like that as you go, so that as you have these interviews and things, you're incorporating the lessons that you can learn from the people that you get to interview. I applaud your initiative. It's definitely kind of scary sometimes to start learning in public like that, but you took the initiative, you did the thing, and now you just got to keep working away at it and incorporating what you learn along the way.
Thank you very much for your valuable words. Can I put this conversation and this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
And
Hopefully it helps.
yeah, and also can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Oh yeah, distribute to your heart's content. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Kat, again for your valuable time and giving me
Yep.
answers to some of my questions.
Cool. It's been great hanging out.
Thank you. Take care.